Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the board work session for December 4th, 2024. I'm Jeff Baker. I'm the chair of DRCOG. Our vice chair, Colleen Whitlow, is traveling today and wasn't able to be here, so I'm going to chair the meeting. We're going to go ahead and get started. Let me pull up the agenda real quick. And then we'll get started. I will call the meeting to order at 4 o'clock. First item on the agenda is the public comment. Up to 15 minutes is allocated now for public comment, and each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. If there are any additional requests from the public to address the board, time will be allocated at the end of the meeting for public comment, but shall be limited to an additional 15 minutes. The chair requests that there be no public comment on issues for which a public hearing has been held before this board. Ms. Stevens, do we have anybody who would like to, from the public that would like to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I do not see any hands raised.
Excellent. We'll just give it a few more seconds here. Again, if you have any public comment, please raise your hand or unmute and let us know you would like to comment. Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 3. This is the summary of the September 4th, 2024 board work session. It was attachment A in your packet. Are there any comments, questions, or changes from any of the board members? I'm seeing no hands. Melinda, do you see any?
I do not, Mr. Chair.
All right. Those the summary of that meeting will be approved as published. We're going to move on to item number 4. This is Proposed Economic Development District Advisory Committee. We're going to hear from Flo Rattano. This is attachment B in your packet. Flo? I didn't see Flo, but if she's there, hopefully you're not muted, Flo.
Linda, is Flo in the meeting?
She was.
Okay. Well, maybe you're not.
I'm not seeing her.
I'm not seeing her
Maybe
either.
something
Maybe she
happened.
got kicked out.
Yeah.
Technical difficulties. Should we go on to agenda item number 5?
Yeah, yes, let's do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to go on to agenda item number 5. We'll come back to number 4. This is the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan Scenario Planning Introduction. It is attachment C in your packet. We have Alvin Badal Sanchez, the Manager of Transportation Planning and Operations. Alvin?
Thank you, Chair. I do believe Ron would like to give a quick intro to the item before I get started.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the board, Ron Papsdorf, Transportation Planning and Operations Division Director here at DRCOG. For the record, really appreciate the chance to have this conversation with the board this evening. The development of our next regional transportation plan, as was introduced to you at the last meeting, is a really significant effort for DRCOG and for the region and all of your communities. The process for making those really important decisions that make up the regional transportation plan have successfully been shaped in our previous planning process through a pretty robust scenario planning process, and we intend to go through a similar process again this cycle. So really happy to be here today to talk through a little bit of a refresher on the scenario work that we did in the last planning cycle and sort of our ideas about pursuing that work for this cycle, and then have a little bit of an interaction with you this afternoon to help us formulate and identify sort of concepts around scenarios that will help inform the decision making. And Alvin will talk in some detail about sort of what scenario planning is, and more importantly, kind of what it is not. So with that, just happy to hand that off to Alvin to walk you through the presentation this afternoon.
Thank you,
Thanks, Ron.
Ron. Alvin?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, directors. I will share my screen and we can get going. Confirming y'all are able to see that on your end. Awesome. So like I mentioned, this is a major activity for us here at DRCOG. It is one of the major activities that we've outlined for the 2050 RTP update. We've been having internal conversations. We reached out to the TAC and the RTC. We're now before the board to get feedback from y'all as well. I'm going to go over, like Ron mentioned, a recap of our 2020 scenario analysis. It will be a high-level recap. When we first introduced these results back to the TAC, RTC, and board about 4 years ago, it was about a 60 to 70 slide presentation and an entire separate report. You'll be getting a high-level recap of what that looked like, just to see what it informed in our regional transportation planning process. Moving from there, I'm going to do some level setting with the latest forecast we're getting from the State Demography Office related to population and employment for the Denver region, some impacts we're already seeing in our models and what that could entail for future conversations here at DRCOG. And then, like mentioned, we would like to have an interactive moment with y'all to get feedback on what are the most important aspects we should be considering during this scenario work. So it will be a Mentimeter exercise, but folk are also welcome to chime in verbally as well. But that will be one way that we're able to compile all of this feedback and combine it with feedback that we received from the TAC and RTC and internal staff feedback. So I will start off with a recap. Like I mentioned, this is an entire report in the Regional Transportation Plan. If you would like more information, that is one of the appendices that you can explore. We can provide a link to that if interested. But this was a major effort for DRCOG, this last major update to the RTP. It informed our project investments that ultimately were included in the RTP. I'll touch on how that changed. And it even had a little life of its own following that. We had some pretty great press at the time, has been used in some other state work around the GHG planning standards, some of their assumptions. So it was a very pivotal analysis that we did 4 years ago that still has a life here in the region. So we would love to replicate that. What can we do this next 4-year cycle? First off, how did we approach scenario planning? I'm sure many of y'all are familiar with it through your own agency's work. For us, it really is a what if scenario question for us. What could a future look like here in the Denver region? We were not picking a scenario. So in some cases, different agencies might do different collections of projects and ultimately select scenario A, scenario B, or scenario C. We were not going that route. We really did want to see what would happen if you made this one decision. How does that ripple effect? How does that ripple out through our transportation network and our urban form? These aren't rigorous evaluations. You will see some metrics with these results, but these are quick, high-level comparisons we're able to do between all these different scenarios compared to a baseline. But it's really about helping us better understand what are the trade-offs that occur when we do make some of these choices in our models, in our investment frameworks with the RTP. And we really wanted to have some better guidance and direction as we were developing the RTP. Following the scenario analysis work last cycle, we moved into our project solicitation and evaluation phase. So this scenario work was instrumental in determining what kind of projects we ultimately asked for from our local agency and regional agency partners. There were 2 land use scenarios. One was an infill scenario, one was a centers scenario. The infill scenario focused growth around 11% of the region's land area, think urban and inner suburban areas. And then the centers scenario focused growth around 3% of the region's land area. Think rapid transit stations, rapid transit corridors, inner city areas. We had 5 transportation scenarios. Off-peak congestion looked at widening portions of the interstate system and making some interchange improvements across the region. Managed lanes and operations added, I believe, over 300 miles of managed lanes to the network here in the Denver region. Travel choices built out a bicycle, walking, rolling network and increased telework options. Transit was a very aggressive transit scenario. It completed fast tracks, built out a bus rapid transit network, expanded transit service, and made transit zero fare. And then we did also test automated and connected vehicles. So we did test 5 transportation scenarios, 2 land use scenarios individually. But we also wanted to see what happens when you combined those. So we did combine our infill scenario and our travel choices scenario and our centers scenario and our transit scenario. We thought those might have some synergies with them. So we wanted to see what started to happen when you started to make land use decisions that complemented transportation investments and vice versa. And then all of these were compared to a baseline that you'll see on each of the charts that are part of this presentation. Where would we have been in 2050 without further transportation investments or changes to how the region was growing? So I'll start with this first chart. I'm going to spend some time on it, walk us through it since the subsequent charts are identical or structured pretty similarly. So I want to make sure we all have an understanding of what these results are looking at. For each of these are being compared to a MetroVision target. So some of the metrics that we looked at are some we can pull from our model: transit, walk, bike trips. What does VMT in the region look like? Others, we wanted to compare to other goals we've already established through our planning process. So in this case, the chart on your screen is showing each of these scenarios and how they compare to a MetroVision target of 23 daily vehicle miles traveled per capita. Moving from left to right, the light gray bar is our 2020 current conditions. Where were we in 2020 with VMT per capita in the Denver region? Our dark gray bar just to the right of that is our baseline scenario. If we didn't make any further changes to our transportation network or change how we were growing in the region, what would daily VMT per capita look like here in the Denver region? You'll notice that's combined with an off-peak congestion label. When we did our scenario work, we found that when we did our off-peak congestion scenario, the results weren't that different, significantly different from our baseline scenario where we didn't do any further investments or changes in growth. So for these next subsequent slides, you're going to see those combined. They weren't statistically different or significant enough to show as a different bar chart. Moving further right, we have our travel choices scenario. That's 25.1 daily VMT per capita. Managed lanes and operations, you actually see daily VMT per capita increase from 2020. So 27.4 versus 25.9. And then we have our transit scenario. The message here is that regardless of some pretty significant transportation investments that we make in the region, none of them get us to our daily VMT per capita goal that we have established in MetroVision. And that carries forward with a number of other metrics that we looked at as well. In this case, we're looking at our single occupancy vehicle mode share to work target that's in MetroVision. This is built the same way as the last one. So moving left to right, 2020 current conditions, 2050 baseline without further investments or changes in growth, our travel choices scenario, our managed lane scenario, and then our transit scenario. Each of those, you do see some movement compared to 2020 and compared to where we would be in 2050, those gray bars. But again, none of them are getting us to our MetroVision target where we're looking to achieve 65%. And then the last MetroVision target I'll compare us to is the delay per capita. This is one where you do start to see some significant movement between the transportation scenarios. Our 2020 baseline shows us at 7. Our 2050 baseline, where would it be without further changes, is 9.9. Our target's less than 9. So you can see in this case, our travel choices scenario gets us to our goal. Our managed lanes and operations scenario also gets us to our goal, but our transit scenario gets us close, but not quite there. For each of these, we were also looking at different trade-offs that occur when you do these different types of investments. So in this case, managed lanes and operations, we are reducing delay. That means we're increasing VMT, as you saw in that previous chart. You might be seeing changes in how folk are taking transit, biking, or walking in the region, especially when you compare travel choices to transit, those two scenarios. As different investments are made, folk are taking trips a little differently. So are they taking trips, cannibalizing trips from other modes? And then structured similarly, but shown differently. We also just looked at some metrics we're able to pull directly out of our model. In this case, the chart on the left is vehicle miles traveled, and the chart on the right is transit, walk, and bicycle trips. Gray remains our 2050 baseline. Where would we be by 2050? We're looking at a 45% increase in VMT. We're looking at a 47% increase in transit, walk, bike trips if we just don't make further investments or change the way growth is occurring in the region. Moving from left to right, though, you can see as travel choices and infill scenarios were tested, you do start to see some movement. But one note here is that that infill scenario is a land use scenario by itself. So there are no further transportation investments being made in that land use scenario. So you're still seeing some reductions in that increase for VMT, 36% compared to 37% when you look at travel choices without a further transportation investment. So just emphasizing the fact that out of this exercise, we found that land use really is a transportation scenario, transportation component for us. And you see the same thing on our transit, walk, and bicycle trips chart. Our travel choices scenario increases transit, walk, bike trips by 101%. If we just do a land use scenario of infill, you can see that increases to 119%. But we don't just make choices that are only transportation or only land use in the region in our planning spaces. So what happens when you combine these two? And that's where you start to see that compounding effect. So for vehicle miles traveled, still an increase in VMT in the region, but a 28% change from 2020 versus a 45% change from 2020. And then same thing with transit, walk, and bike trips, a 178% increase in those types of trips when you combine our scenarios compared to if we didn't make further investments or growth wasn't happening differently in the region. Like I mentioned, we also did a combination centers and transit scenario. So a similar chart structured similarly, again, vehicle miles traveled on the left, transit, walk, and bicycle trips on the right. Gray remains our 2050 baseline from 2020. We expect VMT to increase 45%, transit, walk, bike trips to increase 47%. As you move left to right, green is our transportation transit scenario. Orange is our centers land use scenario. And that's where you start to see a pretty significant increase or decrease in those charts. And that's just a land use scenario by itself, not paired with a transportation scenario. But when you do start pairing and trying to create synergies between those two, you do continue to see that significant change. So light blue, what happens when you compare centers and transit, and then dark blue, what happens when you start to take into consideration different costs that can be part of the decision-making for people traveling in the region. So what do we do with all of those results, those 60-slide presentations? We actually ended up changing the types of projects that we asked for in the regional transportation plan. The top two are the ones we have to have in the plan. We've always asked for in the plan, we'll always have in the plan. Those are roadway capacity and transit capacity projects. But out of this scenario analysis, we saw that there were other project types that can help us achieve our goals in the region. And through our stakeholder and public engagement, we were also hearing priorities for more multimodal investment. So if we're seeing that in our scenarios work, we're hearing that from the public and our stakeholders, how can we show that in our plans investment? So when it came time to actually ask all of our member governments and our regional agencies to submit projects for consideration in the regional transportation plan, we ended up expanding that list. So everything below that dotted line, safety projects, active transportation projects, freight, and then corridor planning projects, we ended up asking for. So these were new project types for us that we haven't always included in the plan as a line on a map, as a row on a spreadsheet, but we were able to adjust those project types that we have in the plan to be more reflective of the priorities we wanted to see and we're hearing in the region, and were a direct result of what we were seeing in that scenario work. And then we were also able to tag that investment and show how much we're actually putting towards those different types of projects that we might not have always included in the plan. Our latest version based off that GHG planning standard work, as well as just amendments that we've been able to process since the original adoption. We have 1.2 billion going to a BRT program, another 940 million going to corridor transit projects in the region, almost 550 million going to safety projects, 970 million going to active transportation. And so we were able to significantly change the investment priority mix in our regional transportation plan as a result of our scenario work. And the scenario work actually really gave us a leg up when it came time for our GHG planning standard work. When it became time to model our network as best we could, figure out how we could reflect all of the investments in our plan, help us achieve GHG compliance with the planning standard. We really relied on the lessons we learned in the scenario analysis. What factors could we change in our model? What dials could we turn in the model that made sense for us as professional planners, but still reflected the millions of dollars that are going towards projects that we don't always show in our plan. And so with that recap, I can shift us over to a discussion on the latest data that we're seeing out of the State Demography Office. and we'll be focusing on population and employment forecasts. This is another section with many bar charts. So I'll frame us again with what each of those are showing, and then run us through them. Oh, Chair, I do
Alvin?
see a, yes.
Sorry, I did see a hand. Director Peck.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know, should we stop you during this as we have questions, or do you want us to do you want to complete the entire presentation before we have questions?
I'll
Well-
defer to the Chair, Director Peck.
I think this would be a good point to take any questions on anything you've heard up to now.
Okay, great. Alvin, would you mind going back to the last couple of slides? This one right here, exactly. When you have active transportation, if we're looking to the future, you've got bicycle facilities, pedestrian and trails, but I don't see anything about, and this might be the wrong place to put it, but I see nothing in there about microtransit, which you hit on, but I think it should be listed. And if you'll go to the next one, the next slide. And on this one, on regional transit, corridor transit planning projects and programs, is there rail? Has that been put in there as corridor transit planning? Have you thought about that at all? As we are looking at Front Range Passenger Rail and completing the Northwest Corridor and the other 3 corridors in RTD, as well as going down to the bicycle active transportation program. Again, I don't see any microtransit. This is where people are going right now and into the future. So I do think it should be listed and not just, we have for so long focused on trails, walking, pedestrian, but when you're talking about Vision Zero, microtransit and rail needs to be part of this project going forward. So that's just my opinion.
I appreciate
Alvin?
that, Director Peck. In terms of microtransit, we cover that a number of different ways. We
Yeah.
don't list every project that we expect to occur in the plan. So some of these are like programs, buckets of funding. But one way we have captured it in the plan is through the most recent set-asides that we've established here at DRCOG. You're correct, microtransit is very popular right now in the Denver region. We've seen a number of studies that are occurring right now that we want to make sure we're capturing. And so they don't rise to maybe the same level as some of these projects that are showing up as individual lines on the map, rows in a spreadsheet, but we do capture those in different ways through the plan. Beyond Chapter 3, which is our projects, we also have Chapter 2, which is our current conditions and our policy statements. So what is the agency stance on complete streets, as an example? What is our stance on Vision Zero? And so we do have a more robust conversation around shared micromobility, microtransit, other modes of travel than beyond just walking, biking, rolling, like are mentioned in these descriptions. In terms of the rail piece, if a project is fiscally constrained, which is one of our requirements in the regional transportation plan, we do include it. So the Northwest Rail peak service study, peak service is included in the RTP as a fiscally constrained project. We were not able to include, just due to fiscal constraint considerations, other completions of the Fast Tracks network. And we don't currently include Front Range Passenger Rail as a specific line on the map or in our row of project spreadsheets, but it is something that we show in our vision list for transit in the region, wanting to keep that project at the forefront for us, knowing it's occurring, number of different alignments that were in consideration 4 years ago, but we also show other corridors that we also want to see transit on. So that is one component that we do include in the plan. It might not be a fiscally constrained project in Chapter 3, but it could be covered in later in Chapter 3 or Chapter 4 of the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Director Kondo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to connect the dots. I'm just curious, the bar graph slides, the scenario comparison bar graphs on slides 10 and 11, does that inform basically or help to set priorities for the projects and programs on the slide that was just previously up? Does that help us figure out where the biggest bang for the buck is when you're talking about different initiatives, whether we're talking about regional transit, active transportation, freight? I'm just trying to figure out how to connect those two together.
Yeah, for this exercise, we didn't take like the second step of making the any particular area more applicable in our solicitation for the projects. But the geographies that we established through the scenario work, either on the land use side or in the transportation side, are informed by our other planning work, which does take into consideration where might there be gaps in particular networks, where might there be more strong ridership, more use of a particular facility. So I would say it's embedded in the work of the scenario planning, but it wasn't a specific explicit consideration coming out of it for project evaluation criteria scoring when it came to that piece.
Director Martinez.
Hey, Chair. Yeah, I am a little, could you explain a little bit more about what the travel choices scenario entails and what, like, what does that mean and how does it affect the inputs of your modeling?
So in that one, we did increase the telework rate in our travel model to show increased folk not taking that work trip. There are other factors in our travel model that we're able to change just to reflect potential like greater sidewalk density, greater bicycle facility density, to change the way people make a decision in the travel model. So it was aimed at essentially reflecting more investment in bicycle facilities, pedestrian facilities, sidewalks, bicycle lanes. We think if we spend $500 million on those types of investments, people travel differently. And our travel model, we don't model the sidewalk network, but we can capture that a little differently through factors that are in that. So it was more changing those dials in our travel model to show what happens when you make an X number of investment in bicycle or pedestrian facilities.
Okay,
And
thank
then,
you. Yeah.
sorry.
No, go ahead and.
I was going to touch on, there was also a safety component to that scenario. So we did also slow speeds in the travel model to reflect a more safe environment for people who might be biking, walking, rolling, walking to transit. So there was also a safety component we attempted to capture with the dials we were adjusting in the travel model.
Okay, great. Yeah, I would just ask and hope that we can make that clear as to the dials or the parameter changes to the model that you spoke of in the MetroVision document really speak to that investment, you know, like you said, because when I first saw that, you know, that's why I asked. I was a little concerned that it was more of a direct, you know, influencing of the preferences of your you know, consumer agents versus, you know, something that policymakers like ourselves would actually have a control over, which is investment. So I think we really need to make that clear in the actual document when it comes out that scenario entails changes to those specific investments that you mentioned and how that's connected to, you know, changing preferences, you know, because I just want to make sure that we're addressing things that we have a guiding document that can give us suggestions on how to make policy.
No, thank you, Director. I appreciate that. And we've definitely learned a lot since the 4 years we initially published the scenario work and how we've shown it in the RTP. So definitely have some improvements to make sure we're showing that connection.
Okay, thank you.
Director Mulvey and then Director Douglas.
Hi, yes, my question's a little bit granular. It's on the slide where you identify projects and programs and the staging by color. That's a reference document, obviously, but one of the things that I note with respect to Douglas County is that there are parts and aspects which are built out and have now greater incidence of accidents. So for example, I see like a 1/2 inch section that has a ton of accidents in the past 2 years that wouldn't have hit the data in time. So I'm wondering, is there a way to layer on this particular staging summary map some of the other metrics that we use to set policy and make decisions like higher incidence of vehicle accidents or greater changes in population or things like that.
Yeah.
The traffic metrics.
Yes, no, you're correct. This is just one of our apps that we show for staging periods to just reflect the level of investment that's occurring in the region and across the region. Chapter 2 is one way that we show that, the different geographies that we create, the different networks that create. One, like the high energy network we have in Chapter 2. And we also have our freight network tiers, our complete streets typology, our active transportation corridors. So that is one way we do. I recognize that's a very static way of doing it though. And so one tool that we've developed that we even use in-house is our data tool to help us with that prioritization. And so where can you lay the BRT network over the high energy network, over a freight corridor, over the complete streets typology? Where might you get the most bang for your buck when you start prioritizing different segments? So I think we can explore how best to show that in our investment maps and see if there's a different way of showing that.
Thank you. I do understand that's a wish list. So thanks for thinking whether or not that's doable.
Director Douglas and then Director Papsdorf.
Thank you. I appreciate that information and what was been said earlier. Here in Commerce City and Adams County, we have a 120th, 104th corridor. We have a lot of transit traffic that goes through our area. And what I don't see on here, and maybe it is with the freight or regional transit, is we really need help with grade separation along Highway 85. We've gone to Congress several times to look for money to do this, and we have great emergency situations on a daily basis. People get trapped between the trains, waiting for the trains. We have EMT trying to get around, go to a different route, and every second that goes by, it's someone's life's in danger. So with this 2050 program, do we have anything in place that could help our region in this area to the east of I-25 that could help with grade separation?
Alvin, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, in terms of the RTP, we rely on our local partners to bring those priorities up during our solicitation phase. I'll note it down and show that reflection as we get into further work on the project development side. We do have a number of different, like you noted, projects and plans that could also show that as a priority. And so I can double check on where that might actually exist. Potentially the freight system, but you referenced a corridor that we're very familiar with is a priority in a number of different ways, from freight, safety. And so I can keep that in mind as we move forward in this solicitation phase and make sure that's reflected as appropriate in other plans.
Sure.
Recognizing that the RTP doesn't always capture every project, but there are other ways we can show those priorities and potentially in a more appropriate way that helps a priority move forward, either locally, regionally, or with national resources.
Yeah, and Alvin, if I could, I'm sorry, if I could add to that just to be clear.
Sure.
Director Douglas and everyone, the two projects that you mentioned at 104th and 120th, Alvin, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe both of those projects are in the fiscally constrained plan. In fact, I remember several years ago doing a cycle amendment to the plan specifically to add those two projects. So I believe those two in particular are in the plan, but your larger point about grade separations for freight is well noted. Certainly an issue that's been on our radar screen. One of the things, it's always hard to see a static map in a PowerPoint, right? We do have an interactive map on our website that shows the fiscally constrained plan and the vision plan in some detail that you can go in and explore and kind of see what investments, what projects, what improvements, both again in our fiscally constrained plan as well as our larger kind of multimodal vision comprise what's currently the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan as the foundation for the work that we're going to do over the next couple of years.
Okay, I just wanted to also mirror how that could look down the corridor of Highway 85 along Santa Fe. That's how the north should reflect, because the intersections, either the trains is separated or the road is separated, and there has been conditions where the road is is lowered in areas to, you know, to help with that offset and the cost. So it's just that we've been working this for a long time, and we're not even at the starting line, and we need to, you know, move further along, because every day we have people moving to our area, into the county, that it's just going to make things worse in the future. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you, Jacob. Director Papsdorf.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to kind of wrap a couple of those comments from Director Mulvey and Director Douglas together, just to put this in context. Remember, we have an existing 2050 regional transportation plan. That's what this is referring to, just for your context. What we're initiating, the process we're going to be going through over the next 1.5 to 2 years, is updating this plan. So lots of opportunities to rethink, reevaluate investment priorities that were identified from the last version of this plan as we move forward in the planning process to develop our next version of the regional transportation plan. So really appreciate this input. The scenario work that Elvin's going to start getting into is one of those pieces that help us inform sort of, and help you inform sort of those decisions. So remember, what's being referenced here is our existing plan as you all adopted it. What we're initiating and the conversation we're going to have moving from this point forward is about updating and reevaluating and adopting a new regional transportation plan.
Thank you, Director Papsdorf. One more question from Director Levy.
Yeah, thank you, Director Baker. The slide you're on is actually a perfect slide for what I want to ask about. You know, we have all these different streams of funding that we're trying to blend and braid and figure out how to slot in where. MMOF and CMAC, and you know, I don't even know all the acronyms. But is there will you have any sort of graphic that tells us what sorts of particular opportunities we may have, given the kind of funding that the legislature has made available through Senate Bill 260 or through you know, some of the other special funding bills? I think what I'm looking at is like you know, the funds that you're showing here for various projects and programs, like how do we show the flow of money from all these different sources into these opportunities?
Yeah, I'll try a couple different ways to respond to that. The first I'll touch on is our financial plan. So one thing we try to do over the next 20 to 30 years is to look at all the investment that we think will be available. So that is every acronym you can think of that you can't think of when it comes to the funding that is coming into the Denver region. So we do group all that together. We don't get as fine-grained in terms of CMAC versus MMOF versus SDBG on these individual projects. We go a little higher just for a little easier calculation, honestly, but DRCOG administered, what do we have control over? CDOT administered, what do they have control over? And then RTD administered, what do they have control over? There are a couple of other categories that we also captured: toll, local funding. Discretionary is something we've also always tried to make sure we capture well, because we do receive quite a bit of funding through the discretionary side, and we want to make sure we can assume some of that in the future as well. I would say, how do we get some of these priorities into particular funding streams? One way is that these are already coming up from other modal plans that we might have in the region. So our freight plan, our active transportation plan, some of our other plans do note, like, what are some potential strategies for implementing? What are some potential appropriate funding streams to evaluate for those? So I think that's one way we try to capture it, is potentially in other plans. In this plan, we do try to just take a higher level approach and blend all the different types of funding that a particular agency might be able to bring to bear that they have the most control over. We do try to be a little discreet, like transit funding can't go to a highway project, vice versa, roughly. So we do try to keep that type of distinction in mind with funding eligibilities. But in that case, we start looking at the program side of the financial plan, which is those buckets of funding, those large groupings of dollars that we don't show every project or every sidewalk, every bike lane, every transit route.
Yeah, okay. I think I understand. And I think my question it may go towards another aspect of this. Maybe it's not the RTP, maybe it's something else, but the context for my question is that some of the legislation that we are hearing may come forward next session, and it's certainly happened in the past where a bill may propose to move some, it seems like the MMOF money is always the source from one thing into another, or broaden the eligibility for those funds. And I've never felt like that I could effectively say that if this money is made available for some other purpose, then these are the things that we won't be able to do that we're planning to do. So it's not really directly related to the planning process itself, but it's really more about how, what funds are we counting on in each of these buckets, and what would happen if we lost some of those sources.
I appreciate that, Director Levy. Oh, go ahead, Doug. Apologies.
No. Thank you, Alvin. Mr. Chairman, if I may, just real quick in response to that, because yes, MMOF, Multimodal Options Fund money, has been a topic of discussion at the legislature over the last year or so. Listen, we've probably established a bit of a track record now, Director Levy, regarding what types of projects that we've utilized the MMOF monies for. So if you need something specifically related to that, we're happy to provide it. But yes, we're very conscious of the conversations that are occurring at the legislature and how it would or could affect our program. So I just wanted to chime in with that.
Great. Alvin, you want to continue with your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. All right, so moving into the latest data that we have available from the State Demography Office. Since our original 2050 RTP was adopted in 2021, 2022, we do believe that we are expecting to see slower growth in the region. 4 years ago, you're going to hear me throw a lot of numbers around. I will try to be as clear as possible in terms of years, which vintage we might be dealing with, but if you have questions, please do stop me. 4 years ago, when we first started this 2050 RTP, we expected to grow about 1 million people by 2050. Now we expect that growth to be a little slower, so about 231,000 people slower. By 2050, we do still expect to grow to 800,000. And so that will be the message. We are still a growing region. We may not be growing as fast as we thought 4 years ago, but we do still expect to add 800,000 people to the Denver region over the next 20 to 30 years. And so that's going to impact the inputs, obviously, into our land use model, our travel model, how people travel, what trips are taken, what trips aren't taken as a result of that reduction. Another change since we last did this 4 years ago is we do have some better tools at hand. And so one is the way we're able to represent our region's population in our land use model. And so we think we're capturing aging a lot better than we were 4 years ago, and the way those choices are made in the land use model. And so you will see some differences as we get into the charts of with these better tools, how are we able to better show the population over the next 20 to 30 years? And then with them, we're able to show changes in specifically age, income, and the number of workers. And so these are the big changes we've seen internally with our own tools, but then what we're also getting from our state partners that will be inputs into our models. So I'll start just overall with population and employment changes. Again, I'll run through each of these charts, get everyone grounded originally. So the gray chart on this case, starting with population, is where we thought the 2050 population would be 4 years ago. So we can call that our 2050 baseline. We expected to go from 3.4 million people to about 4.4 million people. With the latest population forecast coming out of the State Demography Office, we do expect that growth to be about 5.2% fewer people. So our new forecast is to grow about 4.1, 4.2 million people. So still significant growth in the region, but not as fast as we maybe potentially expected 4 years ago. Director Mulvey.
Director Mulvey?
I'm wondering, do we drill down on the 2050 population and employment changes by county or region, sub-region?
So for this particular one, we haven't, but we do that data through the RTP update. So one piece of this will be then distributing that population and employment across our region by county. And so we do get into that exercise later in the RTP update. This is just the regional level estimates to start the conversation.
Thank you.
So then similarly with jobs, we are seeing slower growth on the employment side, 7.1% fewer jobs. Again, all of these charts will be situated similarly. Gray is our 2050, where we thought we'd be 4 years ago. Blue is with our latest data, where we actually expect to be in 2050 moving forward. So for each of these, fewer people in the region, fewer workers in the region, that means there are fewer trips being taken in the region, being reflected in our model, fewer work trips being taken in the region in our model. So what does that do for travel in the region over the next 20 to 30 years? We can also break it down by age. So in this case, with the better tools that we have available to us now to better show aging and choice in our land use model, you are seeing a significant reduction in the working age population and a significant increase in the older adult population, so 65 and older, with these different age group changes. As you can imagine, folk travel differently at different ages, take different trips, rely on different services. With a larger, older adult population, what potential services might they need increased compared to current service and where we thought we might be when we started these forecasts 4 years ago. We're also able to look at workers per household, again, with the better model of showing a more reflective older adult population. You do see more households with no workers. And so those are trips that are no longer being taken for work, no longer commute trips being taken, potentially on transit, also just people driving their motor vehicles across the region. And so that increase in households with no workers is paired with that decrease you're seeing in households with a worker, households with 2 workers. And then we're also able to drill down by income in our land use model. This decrease you're seeing significant in the income between 70,000 to 150,000. We all recognize that people at different income levels make trips a little differently. And so how might this decrease in the income bracket from 70,000 to 150,000 change the way trips are being made in our travel model? What trips are no longer being taken? How are the trips being taken differently? Are there with that decrease that you slightly see in incomes greater than 150,000, are there changes in car ownership in the region as a result of these? So recognizing there's a lot of bar charts, we've also provided a summary slide or two, just what do those actual raw numbers or percentages look like for the region. So like I mentioned, compared to our previous 2050 forecast 4 years ago, we believe that the region will see 231,000 fewer residents, 212,000 fewer jobs, and 130,000 additional households with no worker. Again, these are compared to 2050, not today, not to 2020, not to 2024. So we do still expect to grow. We do still expect to add jobs to the region. It will just be slower growth than we expected. We're also able to show that bracket down by age. So more older adults is the message coming out of the latest forecast that we're seeing from the State Demography Office. That means fewer working age adults and fewer children in the region. And then additional households below the poverty line. So as we capture older adults a little better in our land use model. With that, we've already done some evaluation using those latest data with our travel model. And so with that, we're able to see that there are just in general fewer trips being taken across the region compared to our previous 2050 forecast. That's 7% fewer trips, person trips in general. But as you delve into the different ways folk travel in the region in our model, you can see that that is different. So 5% fewer vehicle trips, 28% fewer transit trips, and 14% fewer bicycle and pedestrian trips. Again, these are not compared to today. These are compared to a former 2050 forecast. So there will still be more transit trips in the future. It'll just be fewer transit trips than we thought. And all those different transit trip, bike trip, vehicle trip reductions result in 5% fewer vehicle miles traveled, decrease in delay per capita in the region, fewer vehicle miles traveled per capita. And so with this, we're already seeing trips being taken differently in our travel model on what we expect over the next 20 to 30 years. And this will have an impact as we get further into the plan update on our greenhouse gas emission reduction work. And so I do also want to set the stage for that, that we do expect just with a slower growth than expected. We do expect to have some potentially conversations around meeting our GHG emission reduction levels, which are already difficult for 2030, but might be a little more difficult with the latest forecast that we're seeing in the region.
Director Maurer.
Thank you. And Alvin, thanks a lot for going through this. I read through it and it's really helpful when you go through it and kind of explain it in more detail. But tell me if I've got this right. So when I'm, looking at these percentages and numbers that you're talking about, so you said just, like 28% fewer transit trips, but then a few slides ahead, before this, you said there was 84% additional older adults. So does that mean that your older adults are not going to want to use transit?
It could mean they want to use different transit than what our model is able to show. This decrease might also just be a reflection of fewer work trips being taken on transit. And so with a smaller working age population, fewer jobs in the region, are those trips potentially not occurring now that we might have thought could occur.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Alvin.
So what this means for our scenario planning looking forward, we do want to note that just compared, it's never apples to apples. As you look at a plan process, you can't always just do a one-for-one comparison. But we do realize that that there will be a smaller population than we initially thought 4 years ago. That will have a number of results in our travel model. One that we're touching on here is just lower traffic congestion than we maybe thought we'd have to account for over the next 20 to 30 years, but that also means different trips are being taken. Other trips are potentially not being taken. Our modeled population in our land use model behaves a little differently, but we think it behaves better and actually reflects real world components as people age, as people make choices in the land use and travel models. And then the third point, like I'd already touched on, won't be apples to apples, won't be a one-for-one comparison, but we do want to make sure that this scenario exercise builds on what we learned last cycle, which was land use is a transportation scenario. The combination of transportation and land use scenarios really moves the dial when it comes to positive movement we're wanting to see in multimodal trips, BMT reductions, and different characteristics within a community.
Director Mulvey and then Director Levy.
Yeah, I thought my hand was up. I was actually tracking with Tammy's thought, and I wonder if you could share with us either now or in a separate email what the assumptions are for how people make trips, because older folks have more time to go do stuff and they pick up children and do things like that. So just because they're not working doesn't mean they're not driving. So those assumptions are really on my mind, and I'm wondering if that is addressed in a definitional section or an assumptions section of the report. So I just wanted to add that thought.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Director Mulvey, this is Ron Papsdorf again. Just, I think we could probably give about a 3-hour presentation to the board on our travel demand model, the tool that we use to do analysis. And I'll couch that first by saying our models are tools to help inform decision making. They're not crystal balls. But they are very sophisticated, both our land use model and our travel models. They're based on survey information that we have based on surveys, past and present, about trip making behavior. Our travel model is probably one of the most advanced that exists in the country that MPOs use. It is based on a lot of science about different trip making behaviors by different demographics, different household and people characteristics. But again, it's a large regional model that sort of consolidates all of the information. It does not predict the Mulvey household based on its occupants and their ages and where they work and how they work and the types of jobs that they do. It doesn't predict your trip making behavior. It is really an aggregate model, but based on good survey and science about general patterns and trip making characteristics of different households. And to your other point, yes, as older adults or households with older adults might not make as many work trips, but those households still generate trips on the transportation system for different purposes. But those trips might have different destinations. And again, it is about the household and the people characteristics and sort of the destinations and work purposes that different people have to influence their trip making.
Thank you. Your description of the sophistication and coverage of it is reassuring, so I appreciate that.
Director Levy.
Well, thank you. And I had a similar question about, exactly how this model teases that out, and your answer was really interesting. And I don't want a 3-hour presentation, but I might take a 20-minute presentation. I actually had raised my hand though for just a different comment about, the transportation impacts. And it looks like in many respects, fewer vehicle trips, fewer person trips, fewer vehicle miles traveled. I think that means per capita. We'll see a lot of trends that look like we're going in the right direction. And I think it's going to be really important to tease out, the fact that this isn't apples to apples. So if we see good trend lines in the VMT as an absolute number, that doesn't mean we've succeeded in mode shift. It's a reflection of demographic changes. And so I hope that we're able to keep our eye on the ball of the VMT per capita numbers and, that sort of thing, that we don't give ourselves too much of a pat on the back for good trend lines.
Yeah, just because I beat Alvin to the punch, and I'll take the prerogative. But Director Levy, I think that's exactly right. And these bullet points are meant to sort of say, great, like all our problems are solved, but they are good indicators and are important considerations as we think about the investment strategies and the priorities we set in this next version of the Regional Transportation Plan. Are there, in fact, due to some of these changes, are there some investment priorities or needs that were identified in the past that aren't as urgent or don't exist anymore because of some of these changes? And then should we rethink sort of the pattern of investments or the types of investments or where investments happen, right? Because we set those priorities, we identified those needs based on a previous set of assumptions around growth and development, land use, population, employment. If those are different today than we thought they would be 4 years ago, then that should influence the decision-making and the plan-making this cycle.
There are no further questions. I'll go ahead and move us on to the next piece of our presentation, which is where we want feedback from each of you. So we're going to do a Mentimeter exercise, but the questions are also already included in the slide packet if you would prefer to just verbalize those comments for me, and we can keep those and log them down. But I will switch my screen share to a Mentimeter exercise. We've had this exercise before the TAC and the RTC, and we've done a similar one with staff internally just to see what some priorities might be to test for this next scenario planning cycle. What did we not learn last time we might want to learn this time? How can we enhance what we learned last time? What's new from 4 years ago that we weren't thinking of? So let me get this going in presentation mode. And then I believe I'm still screen sharing. Someone could confirm that. Cool. So for those, you can either do the QR code with your camera on your phone or go to menti.com, MENTI.com, and then you'll manually enter the code 92998100. Give everyone about 10 seconds to log in, get their camera, get their phone, get their computer going. And then once you're logged in, if you'll just hit that little thumbs mark, just so I have an idea of participation. Again, it's menti.com and then 92998100. And then Jacob's also included that information in the chat for members as well. All right, we'll get going. We have 6 questions for you. We'll start with what demographic shifts are likely to have the most significant impact on transportation needs in our region? We touched on a growing older adult population. You've heard that in a number of different presentations from DRCOG staff, but what else are you seeing in your own communities that we should be taking into consideration beyond a growing older adult population? New employers in the South Metro, older adults. More families with school-age kids, commercial growth. I believe you can also thumbs up potentially if you just want to upvote one of these, but also feel free to replicate some responses. Fewer young people, lower incomes, more reliance on microtransit from younger generations, some new schools in some communities. Fewer workers, older adults. Young folks who still do need to drive, that number increasing particular areas. Service-focused economy. RTV, robo-taxis. Awesome, I'll give it 7 more seconds and then we'll move on to question 2. Changes in commute modes for school-age children. Great. What emerging economic trends could reshape demand for transportation in our region? What are you hearing about nationally at the state level in your own communities? Work from home. Recession, inflation, greater economic development to the north, artificial intelligence, aerospace. Greater economic divides, service workers. The gig economy. The shift from manufacturing to service, more home workers. Increase in tourism. That came up in another conversation we had with the committees as well. Seeing slower growth, but how are we capturing other things that we do see potentially still increasing in the region? So tourism being one of those. Childcare, federal government reductions. Awesome. E-commerce, I'll shift us to question 3. What technological advancements should we consider as potential game changers for transportation? We attempted to evaluate automated and connected vehicles last cycle. The jury was still out on the potential impacts for those, so our scenario ended up being a range of what that potential future could look like. But what else is on the horizon in the last 4 years that we might be able to explore and run to ground with the scenario work? Microtransit, chip manufacturers, AI's impact on traffic patterns, potentially new ride-sharing platforms, personal aerial vehicle transportation modes, charging station infrastructure, just better ability to sync transit routes, so enhanced service, an increase in electric vehicles tied to that charging station infrastructure. What does drone delivery look like in the future? What are the impacts on freight in our region? Hypervelocity, wayside smart tech, last mile solutions, automation. Give this one another 10 seconds since it feels like answers are still popping up, and then we'll move forward. Microtransit, transit users, air package delivery. All right. Question 4. What changes in land use patterns are expected to influence transportation needs and infrastructure? Increasing infill, new development to the north, hopefully more density and infill, accessory dwelling units being more common, urban sprawl, density along corridors, concentration of density, new development being more expensive, continued growth of suburbs, empty office buildings being repurposed into housing. Great, we'll give this another 7 seconds. Redevelopment of shopping centers, need for more multimodal and safe. Micro farming, interesting. Awesome. Question 5, what environmental changes could pose new challenges for transportation planning? Hotter temperatures, more extreme disasters, year-round fire risk, water availability. The impact of that on maintenance of our infrastructure. Any disaster that affects infrastructure, lack of funding for disaster damaged infrastructure, potential population shift, what that extreme weather, specifically winters, does to walking and biking in our region. Ten more seconds on this. zero emission vehicles, limited funding, potential climate change strategies to lower heat island effects. All right. And it should be our last question. What potential disruptions or emergencies should we consider to foster resilience in our region? Wildfires, power grid disruptions, hazmat accidents, pandemics, cyber attacks, political instability, how we construct infrastructure to adapt to climate change. Recession, depression, Bitcoin. Artificial intelligence, office space use, the lack of funding to meet these services that are needed in context of disruption. Awesome. We'll do this one for another 7 seconds. Higher insurance premiums. Loss of power, loss of jobs to AI, so greater automation. Water shortages. Great. Appreciate y'all all running through those 6 questions with us. Like I had mentioned, we've had a similar exercise with the RTC, the TAC, and internally among staff. We really want to see what did we not test last time that we could test this time, what's changed in the last 4 years that might be at the forefront of people's minds that we might be able to evaluate in this scenario work. So we're going to synthesize this feedback along with what we've heard in the other committees and staff, and we'll be coming back before y'all later this month to touch on what did we hear, how is that beginning to define what these potential scenarios look like? Is there anything that are missing from how we're starting to frame those conversations? Like you've seen in this last presentation, the scenario work was extremely impactful when it came time to our project solicitation process, and it still had a life of its own. So how can we make sure this one is as impactful, as important for the decisions that we're making in the region that we can continue to look back on 4 years later and say this is still a useful exercise that we conducted? And so there are a number of different ways that could occur. There are projects and programs, obviously, in Chapter 3. We want to make sure those reflect these priorities that we're hearing. Could also just be reflected in other portions of our plan, Chapter 2, which is really our current conditions, our policy statements as a region, the priorities that we establish in the RTP. Are we missing one around resilience? Do we need one? Do we feel any are duplicative of others? So there are a number of ways that we can take this feedback, not just our scenario work and how we define those scenarios, but how can we make sure the next version of this plan reflects some of these priorities that we maybe didn't hear about as often or with as great urgency as last time. So that concludes my presentation, Chair. I'm happy if there are any other further questions, comments, or conversation, but I appreciate the time you've given me this afternoon. I think it was an extremely fruitful and helpful conversation on our end, so I appreciate everyone.
Thank you, Alvin. I appreciate that. Are there any other questions for Alvin? I know we're running a little short of time. We've got about 16 minutes here. Do we want to go back to agenda item number 4? And I think we've got Flo Retano here. Do we have time, do you think, Executive Director Rex?
Well, I might pass that question to Flo. What do you think, Flo? Can we do it in 15 or do we
Sure.
want?
Sure, I can do it.
All
Okay.
right.
You stop sharing?
Thank you, Flo. We appreciate it. And we went ahead and moved on earlier when there were technical difficulties, but
Yeah,
we're
and
glad
I
to-
apologize. I
we're gla-
apologize for the technical difficulties, but the gremlins were definitely out today. Well, this will feel a little familiar, this conversation, because you had it last month with Robert Spots talking about creating some oversight committees and advisory committees for decarbonized DRCOG. And recall that back in September of this year, the board of directors unanimously approved moving forward with the pursuit of an economic development district designation from the EDA. And so one of the requirements for that designation is the establishment of an oversight or advisory committee that will take the responsibility for providing not just annual updates to the SEDS, but help to prioritize the efforts and make progress on all of the performance issues that we have included in our SEDS. And it also requires the development of a number of partnerships that are external to DRCOG as well. So to manage this process, we're proposing to establish one new standing committee designed to provide that oversight and foster public engagement and ensure accountability throughout the SEDS life cycle. And so that is what I'm here to talk to you today. And I will share my screen. And hopefully you're seeing that. And so what this is really is an addition to our committee document at DRCOG. It will be a standing committee, we assume, not to presume, but the board will be taking action on this item later this month in December. But this is the membership that we're proposing for this Oversight Council. Up to 4 members of the DRCOG board, the executive director of DRCOG or his designee, the Office of Economic and International Office of Economic Development and International Trade, that's our state level economic development entity, representatives from the Colorado Workforce Development Council, representatives from labor unions or other labor groups. Economic development interests will see the predominance of membership on this committee, with 7 members representing various county or municipal economic development agencies, along with the president of Metro Denver EDC or their designee, and the president CEO of Denver South Economic Development Partnership or their designee, and 2 representatives from organizations serving low-income or disadvantaged communities, such as the EDA for Black communities, the Colorado Women's Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber. There are a number of potential nonprofits that could serve that role. Other members, including higher education and K-12, so up to 4 members representing education, up to 5 members representing large employers or manufacturing in the region. We suspect that manufacturing is going to grow as an economic driver in this region. And then 1 representative from a financial institution. So we are proposing that the Office of Economic Development, International Trade, the Workforce Development Council, Metro Denver EDC, and Denver South will designate their members to this advisory committee in February in writing to the DRCOG executive director. Other members shall be appointed annually by the committee chair upon recommendation of the executive director of DRCOG. Officers, committee members shall elect a chair and a vice chair. They will serve 2-year terms. Elections to be held during the first quarter of odd-numbered years. That would mean the first quarter of 2025 will be the first election. And a vacancy can be filled between regular elections using a special election if necessary. The responsibilities will be to provide overall direction of development and implementation of our sets and oversight of the EDD activities itself. Review and recommend annual updates and changes to this board, the DRCOG Board of Directors, for adoption regarding the comprehensive economic development strategy, and then recommend plans, programs, documents, and potential partnerships related to the implementation of that SEDS and activities of the EDD. In accordance with typical guidelines from our committee recommendations, a quorum shall be 1/3 of its members, and remember there's about 30 on this committee. And voting, a majority of those present and voting shall decide any question brought before the meeting. So, Mr. Chair, that is the proposal in front of us, and I will stop sharing and would be happy to take any questions that.
Got a question for you, Flo, real quick.
Yes.
Was there discussion about the nominating committee nominating, going through a process? And I see that Executive Director Rex has raised his hand too.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I was gonna flick on my hand just before you asked the question related to this. So this does fall under the purview of the nominating committee to make recommendations to the full board with regarding the DRCOG board director seats on this. So we're actually getting a pretty comprehensive list of opportunities for board members to serve on various regional committees now. So whatever your particular interest is, we can probably accommodate. So, but I'm knowing that we have a number of committees now. I think we're going to work on a process where we have a better like graphic user interface for board members to fill out, so that is easier for you all to get your once we do the solicitation, to get your interest in and reviewed by the nominating committee. So stay tuned for that. We're going to be working on that over the next month or so.
Director Sherazai.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that clarity. Also wondered about the appointment. So given the responsibility of the remaining positions live with the director of DRCOG, is there an additional role that the nominating committee would play in that? Like, what does that look like for folks, for some of these more community facing appointments? Like, how do they get in that pipeline?
So, Director Sherazai, going back to the fact that we did have a leadership team established to help us direct the SEDS, and we identified a number of partners and stakeholders in that process. We have quite a list of potential entities and names that we could entertain as adding and recommending for membership on this committee, but it is not anticipated that the external members would go through our own process with the committee.
Got it. Thank you for that clarity.
Doug?
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Chairman, very much. Just to follow up on that. Listen, I think we'd probably do it similar to some of the other committees that we've established, that if we have, you know, more interest from a county, let's say, than we have seats, then we would basically have a conversation with those folks and let, you know, basically them decide, or at least get their recommendation on who should sit on it and who should not. And maybe the other one becomes an alternate or something like that.
Director Rogan?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Flo. So just a couple of things. One is that I would love to make sure that smaller communities are somehow represented in this committee. So that would be terrific. And then also the entrepreneurship community in Colorado is so strong. And that may be covered by the Chamber of Commerce or another organization, but that's also something I'd want to make sure we have the voices from that community in the conversations. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Director Roggins. And I share your wish to have our smaller communities represented on the EDAC. And then in terms of the entrepreneur community, yes, that they are definitely an important community component. And Metro Denver EDC is undertaking a relatively strong emphasis on entrepreneurship, as is University of Colorado Denver. And so a couple of our potential partners and members of the EDAC have that focus on entrepreneurs, and so we'll keep that in mind as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I see that Director Levy needs to jump off for a few minutes, or a few minutes early. Thank you for attending, Director Levy. Any other, oh, there's another hand. Director Mulvey.
Hi, Flo, I wonder if we could look at the membership of the committee. There's a negative information I wanted to share that may call for us to broaden a little bit of the membership. You have Denver South there, which is not an EDC, and you have Metro Denver EDC. But there is actually the Denver South boundaries end at Lone Tree. They don't go south in Douglas County. And there's quite a bit of activity, economic activity, and large employers that aren't in Denver South that would be served by new primary employers that are coming in. One was announced on the news today in Parker, and they're not in Denver South. So as an example, I wonder if we might include the new Douglas County EDC, which has been formed as a collaboration of the various EDCs that aren't covered by Denver South, for example. So I wonder if we could consider something like that.
Director Mulvey, that they would be under consideration. Adams County has an economic development initiative. Jeffco has one. And so we would certainly consider that. We definitely want geographic distribution to represent the entire region and the entire economy in the region. So we're aware that that exists. We've also had very strong expressions of interest from Castle Rock, their EDC. So we know that there is very strong interest down south that goes further than Denver South EDP.
Director Odoricio? Oh, sorry.
Did you have something else, Mulvey?
Oh, I was saying thank you. Thank you, though. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to make sure. Actually, I think Flo kind of took the words out of my mouth. I was gonna say, like, as we continue to focus on South and Central Denver, I just think that geographic diversity is important, and so inclusivity is important. And I thought that the South had something carved out and some others didn't. Denver, I could kind of understand being the Central Denver metro area, but the others, it was, I mean, how did we get to that point? Was that just whoever sponsored the bill?
So, Director Odoricio, we've been pretty deliberate in how we look at the region and economic development in the region. So, you know, with the numbers of economic development interests we're looking to add to this, I think we've been pretty thoughtful about who needs to be included, and you know, would be more than happy to have a conversation with you and Lucas if we need to include additional aspects.
Doug?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director Odoricio. Thank you, sir, for the question. I just want to follow up on what Flo said. I think the reason we call out Denver South and Metro Denver EDC specifically is because they're the only two, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're the only two that are multi-county in their mission. I don't know. I don't think Director Odoricio agrees with me. I think that was the reason they're called it. But if there are others that we think there's merit in including, you know, calling out specifically, we're happy to do that.
All right, any other, there we go. Director Sharonzai.
Yeah, thank you. Well, if we are offering up to call out directly, to the point about smaller communities, I would say that Jefferson County is definitely reflective of some of the more like nuanced ways that communities are showing up in their population size, rural versus more urban and suburban corridors. So just thought I'd put that plug out there.
Thank you very much for doing that. Other questions?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yeah. Go ahead, Doug.
So listen, so this is going to be on the December 18th board agenda. If you have any additional thoughts about agencies that you think should be specifically called out on this, we'd be happy to do so. And knowing that we will have, there will be representation from every county on this, but listen, we want to make sure voices are heard on this. There's no necessary, there's no restriction into the membership of this, right? So please just share with either Flo or I, and would be happy to include them. Oh, can I say one more thing, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, go ahead, Doug.
So part of the Economic Development District designation is that we need resolutions of support, right, Flo, from our counties, or at least half the counties or something like that. Do you want to mention that real quick? I know we're over time.
Yes, we need letters of support from the Board of County Commissioners from the counties that are included in the EDD boundary. And we are using the entire DRCOG region. So that's all the counties. That's Clear Creek, it's Gilpin, it's Boulder, it's all of our counties that are included in this EDD designation. So I know that Gilpin County is working on writing theirs. They've already written theirs. They're taking it to their Board of County Commissioners next week. And I'll be working with your staff, your managers, and your economic development staff to ask you for letters of support as well.
Thank you very much for that. We are a little over time. I have two announcements. One is that as the chair of DRCOG, I have made my selection for who will be my nominee or my representative or to sit on the nominating committee, and that is Director Maurer from Centennial. So can we give her a round of applause real quick? Virtual applause. And also, you should have gotten in your email boxes a solicitation to submit a statement of interest in serving on the executive committee for DRCOG. So please take a look at that. If you have an interest in serving on the executive committee, we're going to ask you to go ahead and fill out that very easy form and submit that to Melinda by the date. I forget what date is on there, but as soon as possible.
December 20th.
December 20th. There we go. So please take a look at that. Is there anything else that anyone would like to say for the good of the group? All right, everybody. We will see you on the 18th. Do we need to talk about the change we've made?
Yes, sir.
Director Rex.
Yes, sir. Oh, you want me to do it? Oh, wow. I'll bring the good news. Yeah, that's great. So just so you all know, the executive committee did decide that the December 18th meeting will be held virtual. So you don't have to venture downtown on the 18th, and we look forward to seeing you on the Partridge Family screen here.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate that. All right. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.